It's nighttime on August 30th, 1983. Here at the Kennedy Space Center, the 8th NASA Space Shuttle mission and the third flight of the Space Shuttle Challenger is about to launch. The weather is not exactly ideal as there have been heavy thunderstorms and rain. The mission has been slightly delayed and may be scrubbed altogether if the weather doesn't clear up. Now, this mission is historic for a couple of reasons. For starters, it will be the first shuttle mission with a nighttime launch. One of the astronauts will be the oldest to ever go into space at the time. And then there is another historic first.
The first time that a black American astronaut goes into space.
Lieutenant Colonel Guy Bluford, a fighter pilot and aerospace engineer, is on board as a mission specialist. He will be conducting science experiments and deploying a communications satellite INSAT. After some time, it appears the weather has cleared and Mission Control has given the go to launch.
Control of critical vehicle functions from now through liftoff. T-minus 20 seconds and counting.
While Guy Bluford would tell you himself that he is not an activist of any kind, he does recognize, however, the significance of the moment.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. We have engine start. 2, 1. We have ignition and we have liftoff. Liftoff 32 minutes after the hour and the shuttle has cleared the tower.
Roger, roll. Houston confirms good roll program.
And as Guy Bluford heads to space and blazes a trail for many to come behind him, he knows that there is so much more than the propulsion of an RS-25 engine that is thrusting him further and further amongst the stars. We come from innovators, heroes, and royalty. We are our ancestors' greatest hope. We face many challenges, but we mold that adversity into our greatest strength. We are the glue that holds a nation together and allows it to flourish. Welcome to Black is America, the podcast that highlights little-known African-American figures and stories that make our history come to life. I'm your host, Dominic Lawson. Episode 1, Guy Bluford, the American Astronaut. There are so many factors that go into determining the strength of a nation, its economy, its military might, and maybe the amount of culture it produces. And we know here in the United States, we have that in abundance largely due to Black America. But another indicator and something else Black America has contributed to is science, particularly space travel. And that leads me to the first time I heard the name Guy Bluford. It was on a social media piece that talked about little-known Black history facts. And while there are many of those when it comes to Black history, those facts become even more obscure when it comes to space exploration. That is why the 2016 film Hidden Figures was so important for our community. If you remember, this film highlighted Katherine Johnson, the mathematician, along with her colleagues who helped in the mission to make astronaut John Glenn to be the first man to orbit Earth. Or that time Dr. King convinced Nichelle Nichols not to quit Star Trek after the first season because he knew just how important her role was. So yes, Guy Bluford going into space was historic because it represented... come again? You want to hear the account of how Dr. King helped preserve the role of Lieutenant Uhura. You don't think it's a bit early to be going into another story? No? Okay, let's do this. Now, I'm sure my Trekkies know this tale, but I'll break it down if you're unfamiliar. Let's go to 1967. The first season of the original Star Trek is just about in the books. Nichelle Nichols, who portrays Lieutenant Uhura, is a communications officer who specialized in linguistics and cryptography. Now, Nichelle is doing well in this role and says, well, I'll let her tell you. Here is Nichelle Nichols from her interviews from the Television Academy Foundation.
I had so much fan mail that I didn't know I had that was in the mail room.
She's offered a play that is destined for Broadway. She goes to the office of Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek. She hands him her resignation and Gene holds on to it. But over the next couple of days, a chance encounter with Dr. King changes everything. See, Dr. King is one of Nichelle's biggest fans and says that he and Coretta let the kids stay up late to watch the program. When Nichelle begins to share the bad news, Dr. King cuts her off and explains why her being in Gene Roddenberry's program is so important.
I said, well, I'm leaving Star Trek. He said, you cannot. You cannot. I just looked at him. He said, don't you understand what this man has achieved? For the first time on television, we will be seen as we should be seen every day, as intelligent, quality, beautiful people who can sing, dance, but who can go into space. I could say nothing. I just stood there, realizing every word that he was saying was the truth.
Nichelle goes on to play Lieutenant Uhura for the next 2 seasons until the show ends. She even makes television history as one half of the first interracial kiss on television when she smooches with Captain Kirk. But her impact would go deeper than that. In addition to being in the full-length Star Trek films, from 1977 to 2015, Nichelle volunteered at NASA with the goal to recruit astronauts of color, and that paid off. Dr. Mae Jemison, the first African-American woman to go into space, cited Auntie Nichelle's appearance on Star Trek as being a factor for her wanting to double down on math and science and being interested in becoming an astronaut. I love stories like these because it shows that history does not happen in silos, but they intersect quite often. We have said this in the past, and I'll say it again. History is so much more than just tales from the past. But let us get back to the task at hand of telling the story of Guy Bluford. I mean, we know what's about to happen. That much is clear. Which is why this episode is more so about not what happened, but how it happened. Now, we started the night with a weather delay. Let's see where things are right now.
The problem has been the weather. It has been raining down there at the Kennedy Space Center. And the cloud cover has been a bit of a problem, so much of a problem.
Okay, so it looks like we have a little bit of time to fill. You know, TV hates dead air. Let's see what they're going to do with it.
And my colleague, Lynn Scher, has a profile of Guy Bluford.
Nah, fam. Pump your brakes. This is my show, Ted Koppel. I mean, I respect you and Lynn Scher. You guys are great journalists, but I got this. I swear, man, y'all always trying to... Anyways. I'm sorry, y'all, but what he meant to say was allow me to share the story of who Guy Bluford is today and how he became an astronaut. Okay, let's get some music going here, and voila, there we go. Guy Bluford was born on November 22nd, 1942, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. West Philadelphia, to be exact, just like a rapper turned actor did 26 years later. But instead of spending most of his days on the playgrounds, Uncle G was interested in books and aviation. But don't take my word for it. Courtesy of thehistorymakers.org is Uncle G talking about his youth and his top interest at the YMCA in downtown Philadelphia.
The YMCA was a major factor in my life because I learned how to make model airplanes. I made model airplanes and ships and so forth and so on. So my model building developed at the Y, and that led to my strong interest in airplane and my desire to eventually be an aerospace engineer. Plus the fact that I like math. I'm a math guy. So a combination of all of that just drove me towards being what I wanted to be, an aerospace engineer.
That makes sense. Around the time of his adolescence, the sound barrier was broken in 1947 by Chuck I Be In My Feelings Yeager. Trust me, I'll explain later. But other symbolic barriers were being broken as well, like James Herman Banning becoming the first black aviator to fly coast to coast, or Bessie Coleman becoming the first black woman to have a pilot's license. Let's put a pin in Bessie's story for now. His father was a mechanical engineer, and his mom was a special education teacher. So being studious was in the cards for Guion and his 2 brothers, Kenneth and Eugene. As Uncle G grew older, he attended Overbrook High School that is home to some notable alumni like Wilt Chamberlain and, of course, the young man I was alluding to earlier, Will Smith. Uncle G was a rock star student, captain of the chess team. He was also on the ping pong team. a teacher's aide, and of course, he was in the science club. Now, I don't have evidence of his school record, but it's easy to assume that he had good grades based on where he went to college. And speaking of college, it was Uncle G's guidance counselor who suggested to him that maybe he wasn't college material. For the life of me, I don't know what it is about Philadelphia school officials telling little black kids that they are not good enough for stuff. If you remember in season 1 of Black is America, we chronicled the story of another Philadelphia native, Marian Anderson. In her story, she was trying to get into the Philadelphia Music School, and she was told, quote, "We don't take colored." But we know how that story ended, and this story will end in a similar fashion, but that karma gonna come even quicker because Guion will be accepted into Penn State University. He also joined the Air Force ROTC program and earned his pilot's license. He would go on to graduate with a degree in aerospace engineering and receive a commission from the United States Air Force. Now, while Uncle G was out here living his black excellence of a life, making his dreams come true, he also had a family with his wife he met in college. They would go on to have 2 boys of their own. However, destiny was on the line. It was 1964, and Uncle G had to answer a call. That is because 9 years prior began a bit of a dust-up in Southeast Asia. The Geneva Accords divided Vietnam into North and South, the North being led by Ho Chi Minh, which was backed by the communist regimes of the Soviet Union and China, and the South was under the rule of No Dien Diem, that was backed by, you guessed it, the United States. See, this is during the height of the Cold War, and the Americans feared the spread of communism. Tensions were high, as it were only a matter of time that war would engulf the region. So when the Ho Chi Minh Trail was created, sending supplies to forces that were partial to the communist causes, that didn't help, coupled with the fact that the South Vietnamese leader was becoming more authoritarian along with allegations of corruption, which led to an all-out conflict in Vietnam, to the point that the U.S., who did not want the spread of communism in the region, stepped in with more than just funding and other aid, but with boots on the ground. But in keeping with the recent social media trend, we're Black America. Of course we're going to answer the call to serve. Over 300,000 of the U.S. service members in Vietnam were Black. And while we were only 12% of the population at the time in the United States, that figure accounts for a whopping 31% of the U.S. fighting force, according to the Library of Congress. And of those 300,000 were countless stories of bravery and heroism, like the story of Milton Olive III. On October 22, 1965, Private Olive and several members of his airborne brigade within the Viet Cong jungle were under heavy small arms fire. Private Olive and his battle buddies fought bravely and made the enemy begin to retreat. But as Olive and the 3rd Brigade pursued them, a grenade was thrown in their vicinity. You may not know this about a grenade, but something I learned early on in my military career are that grenades tend to have a 15-meter injury radius and a 5-meter kill radius. But Private Olive didn't care about any of that, because without hesitation, Private Olive jumped on top of that grenade and was killed in the process. Not only did he save the men around him, but they also did not receive an injury from that blast. Now, you may be wondering how come I didn't make Private Olive's story an episode of Black is America on its own. And maybe I could have. You know I love my Black war stories, but if I did that, it would be a short one. That is because when Private Olive made the ultimate sacrifice, he was only 17 days from his 19th birthday. This sacrifice also points out something else that is found in the Library of Congress. During the Vietnam War, Black service members saw the highest level of combat and the highest casualty rate of any other group. People like to say that when Black America is critical of the United States, that we hate this country. That couldn't be further from the truth. Don't believe me? Then I invite you to East Ohio Street in Chicago, Illinois, and have a picnic at Milton Lee Olive Park, the namesake of the first African American recipient of the Medal of Honor during the Vietnam War. But while Private Olive displayed his bravery in the jungle, Guy Bluford took his to the skies as a combat pilot. Here is Uncle G sharing some of his experiences.
I flew 9 months in Vietnam, and I flew out of Cam Ranh Bay. 144 missions total. Dropped bombs all over Southeast Asia, South Vietnam, North Vietnam, Laos. I had 65 missions over North Vietnam. Primarily, they were air cover. I did fly that way. We would take off out of Cam Ranh Bay and fly north. We would refuel just below the DMZ between North and South Vietnam. Still remember seeing all those tracers and all that sort of stuff. Still remember flying home one day and having a bullet hole in the wing.
Uncle G would then head back into the classroom to earn a doctorate in aerospace engineering. Not bad for a kid who not college material, huh? But this is where Uncle G was not satisfied with his accomplishments. With his resume, at this point, he could have easily gone into the private sector and live a very comfortable life. But that's the thing about dreams versus goals. As the American businesswoman Tabitha Brown would say, and I'm paraphrasing here, quote, "Goals are plans that you make, but dreams are given to you from God." It's not an easy thing to be accepted into the NASA program. And this is even if you are a white man, which means if you are a person of color, it's even more difficult. So difficult that it could take a U.S. president personally using his influence to get you in. You'll see what I mean in a while. So when NASA opened up the process to be part of a new era in space exploration, as they introduced the Space Shuttle program, the competition was fierce.
In '77, I applied for the Astronaut program among 10,000 other people. And in '78, I got selected. There were 3 African Americans in that class, myself, Ron McNair, and Fred Gregory. I think any of the 3 of us could have done that role. Fred was a test pilot, Ron was an engineer, and I mixed both, had the blend of both. But it wasn't for me a desire to be the first African American in space. My desire was to make a contribution.
And after more extensive training, Uncle G would get his official designation as an astronaut in 1979. And this leads us back to where this story began at the Kennedy Space Center in 1983. Remember, Uncle G is set to be the first African American in space, but the weather is delaying history a bit. Now, you may be wondering why I purposely say the first African American to go into space, as opposed to the first black person. Well, that is because Arnaldo Tamayo Mendez, who was a Cuban cosmonaut, part of the Soviet Union's space program, is technically the first black person to break that barrier in 1980. But let's get a sense from Shuttle Control where we stand with Guion's mission.
So we have received somewhat of a clearance as far as the Air Force Weather Office is concerned. However, managers here still discussing the options. We have people involved from headquarters, Kennedy Space Center.
Okay, so it looks like we have some time. And as we wait, it appears we have some special guests here in Florida. Lynn Shear of ABC News. Let us know who came through to see Uncle G make history.
Guy Bluford, incidentally, acknowledged a debt to some of the black airmen who flew before him, the fellows who made it possible for blacks to fly at all. And, of course, tonight, it's a big honor for NASA that 3 of the original black pilots who were called the Tuskegee Airmen because they trained down at Tuskegee Airfield in Alabama, they are here tonight as special VIP guests. George Roberts, Lemuel Custis, and Charles DeBow were 3 of the first 5 who ever flew at that airstrip, and they are here tonight to watch their colleague, now Guy Bluford, go up in space. So
the famed Tuskegee Airmen are here in attendance, so I think I have time to give them their proper due before launch. Hold up for a second. I think Mission Control is saying something.
And there it goes. The clock is moving.
7 minutes, 50 seconds, and count.
Okay, looks like I need to make it quick. I'll get you back in time. Don't worry. Now, during World War II, for a group of black men, there was a simultaneous fight for freedom against the Axis powers and the internal battle against racial segregation in the United States. The Tuskegee Airmen were seen as beacons of valor and defiance. These African-American pilots trained at the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama not only took to the skies to defend their country, but they also challenged the deeply ingrained prejudices of their time. You know, the funny thing about this is that it points out just how dumb racism is. I mean, you have them train in Alabama because you want to separate them from the white pilots, but you weren't smart enough to dumb down the training because they got the exact same instruction as their white counterparts, which led to an impeccable flying record and a lower rate of lost bombers. Which leads us to this segment's sponsor of this podcast, which is Black America, a 400-year proof of concept of making your better. But no mission highlights just how good the Tuskegee Airmen were than the story of Captain Wendell Pruitt of St. Louis and his wingman, a New Yorker, Lieutenant Lee Archer, better known as the Gruesome Twosome, due to their exceptional flying in combat. On July 18, 1944, 66 P-51 Mustangs of the 332nd Fighter Group, better known as the Tuskegee Airmen, were flying overhead of the Po Valley in northern Italy. They are running an escort mission to bomb an airbase in Austria. All of a sudden, a group of Me-109 or German fighter planes were making a beeline towards the bombers. From there, the Gruesome Twosome got to work. They break from the formation and take on the German planes. It's an intense dogfight, but they prevail. They rejoin the rest of the 332nd Group and complete the mission of the bombing run. But there are so many other stories like these that highlight just how good the Tuskegee Airmen were. Despite facing skepticism and discrimination, they excelled, proving their detractors wrong with every mission flown. They were one of the most decorated fighter groups of World War II, inspiring many to take to the skies, which includes a little boy from Kansas City. But first, let's check in with Mission Control on that countdown.
T-minus 4 minutes and counting. Crew has been asked to close the visors on their launch and entry helmets. Final purge sequence of the main engines now underway.
Oh yeah, we have plenty of time. Where did I leave off? Okay. So there was a little boy who was inspired from Kansas City named Edward Dwight Jr. and originally wanted to be an artist when he grew up. But his dad told him, "No, you're going to be an engineer, son." But as a kid, he always hung out in an airfield near his farm home. He would see many of the planes come and go. He was there so much that they even put him to work, handing the mechanics their tools, hanging out in the maintenance shack, things like that. And one day he said, "Why don't you take me up there in the skies?" And they did exactly that. From there, his whole world broadened. He said that when you go up in the skies and you see past the horizon, your curiosity expands. And then one day, as an 18-year-old while delivering newspapers, he saw a picture of a black pilot. He had never seen that before. This image not only captured his imagination, but it sparked a dream. And it's another example of why representation is so important. So that day, very similar to Uncle G, he decided to do just that. He joins the Air Force and becomes a pilot. He becomes an officer and even has his own office. But the universe and the title character of this particular story needs Edward Dwight's hand with something. In the late 1950s, the United States was starting its space program. It was made to feel a bit inferior due to the Soviet Union, its Cold War combatant, because they had successfully launched Sputnik, thereby certifying itself more as a world power. So the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, was formed. In the 1960s, the United States was excited for its foray into space exploration. None more than its newest top executive. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, John Fitzgerald Kennedy.
With the advice of the Vice President, who is Chairman of the National Space Council, we have examined where we are strong and where we are not, where we may succeed and where we may not. Now it is time to take longer strides. Time for a great new American enterprise. Time for this nation to take a clearly leading role in space achievement, which in many ways may hold the key to our future on Earth.
But JFK also has something else in mind. Now, if you really believe he was authentic or he did it to secure a certain voting bloc, I'll leave that speculation to you. But additionally, with space exploration, the Kennedy White House believed that it was important in the effort for civil rights that a black astronaut be recruited. So one day, Ed gets a letter from the Pentagon. Essentially, the letter states, at the direction of the president, he is afforded the opportunity to be an astronaut. His superior immediately tries to talk him out of it. He convinces Ed that he has a good thing going in the Air Force, which he did, and that he was on the path to being a general, which wasn't out of the realm of possibility. But our community has never made advancements by playing it safe. And remember, when Ed was a kid and went up in the plane for the first time, his curiosity expanded. Now we're talking about the possibility of his curiosity expanding even further. Forget the clouds. We're talking about the stars here. So Ed disregards the advice and goes for it. He receives orders for Edwards Air Force Base for test pilot school. And from day one, he was branded the Kennedy boy, suggesting that the only reason he got this opportunity is because JFK made it so. And to a certain extent, that was true. But it's not as if he didn't have the resume to be there on his own merit. So this was not going to be an easy task, not only because the likelihood of dying as a test pilot increases dramatically, but the racism that was about to come his way. And that leads us to Chuck Yeager. You know, the guy I mentioned earlier in this story that broke the sound barrier. I said he felt some type of way. Well, he wasn't fond of Ed being there. And the reason Chuck was there was because he was running the test pilot school for the astronaut candidates. According to Ed, Chuck said this, quote, "Don't talk to him. Don't socialize with him. Don't drink with him. Don't invite him to your parties. Just ignore him like he doesn't exist. And in 6 months, he will be gone." They were trying to break him. But in our community, we quit nothing. Many people would like you to believe otherwise, but we don't. So Captain Ed Dwight stands firm. He moves on to the next phase of his training, and the country is starting to get wind that there potentially may be a black astronaut in the country soon. So he's doing a lot of interviews, photo ops, and becoming more famous by the day. He was getting more press coverage than his fellow astronaut candidates, which I'm sure only built more resentment. Ed Dwight's story was not just being covered in the United States, but around the world. And little does he know, Ed is slowly sparking the brain of little black girls and boys at the possibility that they too can become astronauts. It surely looked like Ed Dwight, the first African American to be an astronaut candidate, was indeed on his way to be the first African American and the first black person to go into space. But an unexpected weather change may have altered the course of history on multiple fronts. On the morning of November 22nd, 1963 in North Texas, the weather was damp and overcast. There was even a bit of rain. The forecast actually called for more rain later that day. But in the late morning hours, it unexpectedly turned sunny with a temp of 70 degrees. Due to the change in weather, President Kennedy, who was going to be part of a motorcade in downtown Dallas, along with his wife and Governor John Connally of Texas, decided, much to the dismay of the Secret Service, not to use the plexiglass bubble on the top of the 1961 Lincoln convertible. You know, sometimes history, as important as it is a mean and sadistic bastard, because on that beautiful sunny day in Texas, it turned into one of the darkest days in American history. Walter Cronkite of CBS News.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago. Vice President Lyndon Johnson.
Dwight's journey through the astronaut training program was fraught with challenges. Despite his undeniable talent and determination, he encountered resistance and racism. The support from President Kennedy provided a layer of protection, allowing Dwight to navigate through the program. However, The tragic assassination of JFK in 1963 marked a turning point. With Kennedy gone, Dwight lost a crucial ally, leaving him vulnerable to the biases and prejudices that he encountered. Courtesy of ABC News is Captain Ed Dwight Jr. during a press conference in 1965.
First, if we may, why aren't you an astronaut now?
Well, I couldn't begin to tell you. I have no comment for that question. I don't know.
You feel that what's happened to you is a setback for civil rights opportunities in this country?
No, I would rather not comment on that.
Why?
Well, because first of all, you got to. I have to establish what's happened to me first, and this, as far as I haven't done, and I don't wish to at this time.
Facing insurmountable odds and a lack of support, Ed Dwight made the difficult decision to leave the astronaut program in 1966. He may not have gotten his chance to soar into the cosmos like he wanted, but he sure did blaze a trail, along with Robert Lawrence. See, a few years after Dwight left, Major Robert Lawrence would go through the same astronaut program, and he is credited as this nation's first African-American astronaut. He was poised to become the first to go into space, but a tragic accident in 1967 as an instructor pilot would defer that dream a little longer for a community. Barbara Lawrence, Robert's wife, was very excited for him as he loved science and the potential of space exploration. Which is why on August 30th, 1983, she found her way to the Kennedy Space Center to be there in person to see her husband's dream vicariously fulfilled. We're here now. All the training is done. The preparations are finished, and the weather has cleared. Lieutenant Colonel Guy Bluford has done everything that was asked of him. The work, the sacrifices, and the mental endurance. It has prepared him for this moment to stamp his place in American history. Roughly 364 years from when our ancestors made it to the shores of America, 120 years after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, and just 19 years removed from the signing of the Civil Rights Act, another barrier is about to be removed for a community.
11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. We have engine start. 2, 1. We have ignition and we have liftoff. Liftoff 32 minutes after the hour, and the shuttle has cleared the tower.
Tower clear. Roger, roll. Houston confirms good roll program. Standing by for main engine throttle down to control structure.
I said at the beginning of this story that there was so much more than the propulsion of an RS-25 engine that is thrusting him further and further amongst the stars. That is because it took an entire community that understood excellence was the standard, and that doing our part, no matter how big or small, was going to push the next generation forward. The Tuskegee Airmen, Nichelle Nichols and Dr. King, Katherine Johnson, Major Robert Lawrence, and Captain Edward Dwight Jr. And here we are to witness Lieutenant Colonel Guy Bluford becoming a legend in the Black space community. Godspeed, Uncle G. Godspeed.
Challenger's go at throttle up.
Challenger, Houston, you're go at throttle up.
Roger, Houston, we're looking at the moon.
Roger that. Dick's getting bounced around a little bit. The spectacularness of this.
Guion would go on 3 more missions, with his last being in December of 1992. He would log almost 700 hours in space. Ronald McNair, who Uncle G mentioned earlier, became an astronaut as well, and his number would get called to go on the shuttle mission. But unfortunately, he was part of the Challenger mission in 1986. He, along with 6 other souls, would not survive due to an O-ring failure from cold weather and wind shears. We salute you, Uncle Ron, from this side of the ancestral plane. Excitement for space exploration has grown in recent years. There is renewed energy as we begin to chart the path to Mars. Along with that is a new generation of African American astronauts, astrophysicists, and others that will get us to explore new planets, new galaxies, and who knows, maybe new life forms. My daughter hopes to be part of that process, and they would all owe a debt to Lieutenant Colonel Guy Bluford, who followed a process that led him to literally explore new heights. The proud son of West Philadelphia teaches us not only can a dream be attained, but that it is important to set an example, because even if it hasn't been done before, it doesn't mean it's impossible. And it's a mission Uncle G gladly accepts.
African Americans can do the job just as well as anybody else. I feel very proud to be a role model, and I hope that when people look back at me, they can say, yeah, I'd like to be like Guy Bluford. That's fine with me.
And that is why Guy Bluford is the American astronaut. The Black is America podcast, a presentation of Owl's Education, was created, written, researched, and produced by me, Dominic Lawson. Executive producer, Kendall Lawson. Cover art was created by Alexandria Eddings of Art Life Connections. Sources to create this episode include NASA.gov, History.com's program Military Heroes, the New York Times, HistoryMakers.org, the International SciEd Center and Space Museum in Hutchinson, Kansas, the Television Academy Foundation, Arcfield Weather, ABC News, the Smithsonian Magazine, and CBS News. Be sure to like, review, and subscribe to the Black is America podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Also, let people know about the podcast. We would appreciate that very much. For a full transcript of this episode and other resources, go to www.blackisamericapodcast.com. There, you can read our blog, leave us a review, or you can leave us a voicemail where you can ask a question or let us know what you think about the show that we may play in a later episode. Finally, thank you for listening to the Black is America podcast, where our history comes to life. Until next time.